So let me paint a picture for you that might hit a little too close to home. You're 30 years old, you've got a decent job, you're making decent money, and yet when you look at your bank account and your investments and your net worth combined, you're nowhere near $100,000. In fact, you're probably sitting somewhere between 0 and maybe 40,000 if you're doing better than average. And here's the thing that really bothers you. You've worked hard, you've made good decisions. You've done everything they told you to do. Go to college, get a good job, save money, invest. And yet 72% of people your age are in the exact same boat. 72%, that's not a personal failure. That's not you being bad with money. That's not you being lazy or irresponsible. That's a systemic problem that nobody wants to talk about because it's not as simple as the Instagram gurus make it sound. My name is Lenny, and I spend way too much time analyzing why achieving $100,000 in net worth by 30 has become statistically impossible for most people. If you're someone who feels behind, if you're someone who's wondering why the math doesn't add up, no matter how much you hustle, if you've ever felt that crushing sense of impossibility when you do the numbers on what it would actually take to hit that mark, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Here's what I want to do. I want to take you through the actual math, not the aspirational math from people selling you courses, not the theoretical math from financial advice that assumes you live like a monk. The actual real-world math of what it takes to go from where you are now to $100,000 in net worth. And once you understand why most people can't do it, you'll understand something much more important. You'll understand that the system is rigged in ways you probably didn't realize. And more importantly, you'll understand what you can actually control. Let's start with the basics. You're 30. Let's say you started working at 22 after college. That's 8 years of potential wealth building. 8 years. Most people in this situation have somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000 saved up. Some have more if they were really disciplined. Most have less if they're being honest with themselves. Let's say you're in the upper half and you've managed to scrape together $20,000 in savings and retirement accounts combined. That sounds pretty good, right? That's better than average. But here's where the math gets depressing. To get to $100,000 in net worth by 30, you would have needed to save $80,000 in the 8 years since graduation. That's $10,000 per year. Let me put that in perspective. The average salary for someone with a college degree in their 20s is somewhere around $50,000 to $60,000. After taxes and basic living expenses in most places in the country, you're left with maybe $500 to $800 per month in discretionary income. That's $6,000 to $10,000 per year. If you're incredibly disciplined and you spend nothing on fun, dating, emergencies, or anything beyond absolute necessities. So the math doesn't add up. The system is asking you to save 100% of your discretionary income for 8 straight years while everyone else is getting married, having kids, going through life changes, and dealing with unexpected expenses. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about the compounding factor. If you had invested $10,000 every single year for 8 years starting at age 22 at an average market return of 7% annually, you'd end up with roughly $110,000 right now at age 30. Sounds great, right? That's the promise. But here's what the math doesn't tell you. That assumes you had $10,000 to invest every single year. That assumes you never had a car emergency that cost $4,000. That assumes you never had a medical bill. That assumes your job didn't lay you off. That assumes your rent didn't suddenly jump because your landlord raised it. That assumes you didn't have to move for a better job. That assumes you never wanted to go on a single vacation or do literally anything that isn't work and investing. For most people, this is fantasy math. Let's look at the reality of what happens in those 8 years between 22 and 30. You graduate college with an average of $37,000 in student loan debt. For those with student loans, that's taking up a meaningful chunk of your monthly budget. We're talking $300 to $500 a month, depending on your repayment plan. That's $3,000 to $6,000 per year. That's not going into net worth, it's going to debt payoff. Then you need a car because most places in this country don't have public transportation. Maybe you inherit one from your parents or buy a used one for $5,000. That car needs insurance, maintenance, gas. We're talking another $200 to $300 a month. That's $2,400 to $3,600 per year. You need a place to live. In most major cities, rent for a one-bedroom is somewhere between $1,200 and $2,000 per month. Even in cheaper areas, you're looking at $800 to $1,000. That's $9,600 to $24,000 per year, just on housing. You need to eat. You need to buy groceries, go out occasionally, have some semblance of a social life. Even if you're incredibly frugal, that's $300 to $500 a month. That's $3,600 to $6,000 per year. Now add utilities, internet, phone service, basic clothing, personal care items, health insurance copays, maybe a small emergency fund. You're easily at $2,000 to $2,500 per month in non-negotiable expenses. That's $24,000 to $30,000 per year. So let's do the math. You're making $55,000 gross as a reasonable estimate for a college graduate in their 20s. After taxes, you're taking home roughly $40,200. Your non-negotiable expenses total about $25,000. You've got $15,200 left. But wait, that's before you account for student loan payments of $4,000 per year. That brings you down to $11,200. That's your entire discretionary income for the year. To hit that $100,000 net worth target by 30, you'd need to save 100% of that and still come up short of the $10,000 a year you'd need to invest. But here's the thing, you don't have zero discretionary expenses. You're a human being. You have birthdays, your friends get married, you need to buy gifts, you want to see a movie occasionally, you want to get coffee, you want to date, you want to have fun. That $11,200 needs to cover all of that. Most people end up with maybe $2,000 to $3,000 left over by the end of the year. That's 25 to 30% of what you'd need to hit that target. And this is where most financial advice completely misses the point. When people tell you to just save more and invest more, they're acting like the problem is a willpower issue. They're saying you're just not disciplined enough. You're just not grinding hard enough. You're just buying too much coffee or eating out too much. But the problem isn't your discipline. The problem is that the baseline cost of living in this country has completely outpaced wage growth. Since the year 2000, the cost of housing has increased by roughly 80%. The cost of healthcare has increased by about 150%. The cost of education has increased by almost 300%. Meanwhile, wages for people in their 20s and 30s have barely kept pace with inflation. In many fields, they've actually fallen behind. So it's not that you're worse at saving than previous generations. It's that you're being asked to save a higher percentage of your income just to afford the basic necessities. Let me show you how this plays out in a more detailed scenario. Let's say you're a software engineer making $85,000 per year. That sounds pretty good, right? In the tech industry, that's actually on the lower end of entry-level to junior positions. After taxes, you're taking home roughly $63,000 a year, or $5,250 per month. You're living in a mid-sized city where rent is $1,400 for a decent one-bedroom. That's already 27% of your take-home income. Add another $400 for utilities, internet, and phone. Now you're at $2,700. Add groceries and dining out, maybe $600 a month. Now you're at $3,300. Add transportation costs, either a car payment and insurance, or public transit, maybe $400. Now you're at $3,700. Add student loans, $250. Now you're at $3,950. Add personal items, clothes, haircuts, entertainment, everything else, maybe $300. You're at $4,250. That leaves you with $700 a month in discretionary savings if you're lucky and you don't have an emergency. $700 a month. That's $8,400 per year. Over 8 years, that's $67,200 before any investment returns. With a 7% average return, that gets you to roughly $80,000. You're still $20,000 short of $100,000 at 30. And that's assuming you never had a car repair that cost more than $1,000. You never had a dental issue that insurance didn't cover. You never had to replace your laptop for work. You never went through a breakup that required moving. You never had to fly home for a family emergency. You never got sick and had to miss work. You never had any of the things that actually happen in real life. The other major factor is that most people don't actually have their income stay flat from 22 to 30. Some people do get raises, some people do change jobs for higher pay, but those raises don't scale linearly with how much additional wealth they generate. Here's why. When you get a raise, your lifestyle tends to inflate along with it. You move to a nicer apartment because you deserve it. You get a better car. You eat out more frequently. You subscribe to more services. You join a nicer gym. Economists call this lifestyle inflation. Psychologists call it hedonic adaptation. The result is the same. You end up with barely any more money left over at the end of the month than you had before. In some cases, you end up with less. There's actual research on this. A study from Northwestern University found that as people's incomes increased, their financial satisfaction actually decreased in many cases. Why? Because their spending increased faster than their income. They had more money, but they felt poorer. So that raise that was supposed to accelerate you toward $100,000 in net worth actually just bumps you up to a slightly nicer apartment where you feel just as broke. There's another factor that nobody talks about, and it's absolutely critical. Starting to invest in your 20s does buy you compound growth. That's real. But the compound growth argument assumes a few things that don't line up with reality. First, it assumes you can actually access those investments. Your retirement accounts like a 401k or IRA are locked away until 59 and a half. So if you're trying to hit $100,000 in net worth by 30, you can't actually count those retirement savings as part of your net worth number if you need to access it before 60. Second, it assumes you have the consistency to invest throughout your 20s without ever needing to touch that money. But most people in their 20s don't have enough emergency fund. Half of Americans can't cover a $400 emergency. So that investment you made at 22 that was supposed to compound for 8 years often gets cashed out at 25 when your car breaks down or you get laid off. Third, and this is huge, it assumes the market cooperates. If you started investing in 2008 right before the financial crisis, that money lost half its value. It took until 2013 for those investments to get back to where you started. 5 years of compound growth completely wiped out by timing. Younger investors have less ability to weather market downturns because they have shorter time horizons and less capital to average down into losses. So the promise of compounding is real, but it's also fragile. It can be completely derailed by circumstances outside your control. Let's also talk about the goal itself. $100,000 in net worth. Why is that the magic number that people keep talking about? It's not arbitrary, it's roughly the cost of a median single-family home down payment. It's the amount of money that, if invested, would generate $4,000 a year in passive income at a 4% withdrawal rate. It's the point where people start to feel like they've made it, like they've crossed over into some kind of financial adulthood. But here's the thing. That number is increasingly disconnected from what actually matters. If you're in a high cost of living area, $100,000 in net worth is nothing. You can't buy a house with it. You can't retire on the passive income. You're still grinding. If you're in a lower cost area, $100,000 can actually be meaningful. It can be a down payment. It can be meaningful passive income. So the goal itself is this weird cultural milestone that sounds impressive but means wildly different things depending on your circumstances. But let's keep going because there's a bigger pattern here. 72% of 30-year-olds not reaching $100,000 in net worth isn't a failure of those people. It's evidence of a larger structural problem. The wealth-building path that worked for previous generations has been completely disrupted. In 1980, if you graduated college and got a job in the middle class, you could reasonably buy a house in your late 20s or early 30s. Home prices were roughly 3 to 4 times your annual income. Today, in most places, they're 8 to 12 times your annual income. The wage-to-housing cost ratio has completely inverted. In 1980, you could put yourself through college working part-time summers. Today, college costs have increased so much that the majority of students need loans. In 1980, healthcare, internet, cell phone bills were either free or non-existent. Today, those are mandatory monthly expenses that didn't exist in previous generations' calculations. So the math that older generations could do in their heads in 1980 is fundamentally different from the math of today. Previous generations didn't have to beat the math. The math naturally added up. Today, you have to actively defy the baseline patterns of society to build wealth. That's not a personal failure, that's a structural shift. Here's what's fascinating though. While 72% of 30-year-olds haven't hit 100,000 in net worth, a significant minority has. How? Well, some of them got lucky. They had parents with money who helped with down payments or co-signed loans. Some of them got really lucky with career timing. They joined tech companies early or had unusual salary growth. Some of them made sacrifices that are almost socially unreasonable. They lived with roommates into their 30s. They never took vacations. They never dated seriously because dating requires spending money. They had a single-minded focus on wealth accumulation that, while admirable, isn't sustainable for most people because it's not actually living life, it's just delaying it. But there's another group, the people who hit 100,000 by 30 and then realized that hitting 100,000 didn't actually change their life in the way they expected. They're still stressed about money, they're still worried about losing their job, they're still caught on the hedonic treadmill where the next milestone, maybe 500,000 or a million, seems just as far away as 100,000 did before. They've discovered something that most financial advice doesn't talk about. You can hit the external number and still feel empty because the number was never actually the problem. The problem is the mindset. So why are we so obsessed with $100,000 specifically? Part of it is cultural. It sounds like a real accomplishment. Part of it is marketing. Financial gurus love selling the dream of 100,000. It's specific enough to sound achievable, vague enough that it applies to everyone, and far enough away that people will keep watching videos and buying courses, trying to figure out how to get there. But part of it is also legitimate. There's something psychologically important about hitting a milestone number. The issue is that the 100,000 number is often just a proxy for what we actually want. We want to feel secure. We want to feel like we've made it. We want to have options and freedom and breathing room. And honestly, 100,000 in net worth doesn't actually provide those things for most people. It's a number that feels big, but doesn't actually function as a life-changing amount of money in modern times. Let me tell you what actually changes things. What actually creates financial security isn't a specific net worth number. It's the ratio of your fixed expenses to your income. If your fixed expenses are half your income, you have breathing room. You can handle a job loss. You can handle a market downturn. You can actually live. If your fixed expenses are 80 or 90% of your income, no amount of net worth matters. One financial shock and everything collapses. This is why so many people making six figures are still living paycheck to paycheck. Their lifestyle has inflated along with their income. Their fixed expenses are too high. Here's what I'm getting at. The reason 72% of 30-year-olds don't have 100,000 in net worth isn't because they're not trying hard enough. It's not because they're not disciplined enough. It's not because they're not investing enough. It's because the baseline math of our economy doesn't make it mathematically possible for the average person with an average income in an average location to accumulate that much wealth in that little time. The system is rigged, not necessarily through malice, but through structural momentum. Housing costs have outpaced incomes. Education costs have outpaced incomes. Healthcare costs have outpaced incomes. And we're supposed to accumulate wealth in the margins while our base costs have exploded. But here's the truth. You're not actually behind. You're not actually failing. You're just operating in a different economic reality than the one the old advice assumes. And understanding that is the first step to actually building wealth in a way that makes sense for you. The second step is to stop comparing your net worth to the arbitrary milestone. Instead, start optimizing for what actually matters. What actually matters is reducing the ratio of your fixed expenses to your income. What actually matters is building skills that increase your earning power over time. What actually matters is investing in ways that work for your real life, not some theoretical perfect scenario where nothing bad ever happens. What actually matters is protecting your time and your energy and your life from the endless hunger of wanting more. The people who do build significant wealth in their 30s and beyond aren't doing it because they're grinding harder at their day jobs. They're doing it because they figured out how to either increase their income in meaningful ways or decrease their required lifestyle expenses or both. They learned a skill that made them valuable. They started side projects. They thought about their career trajectory instead of just taking whatever job paid the most right now, or they made the conscious choice to live below their means, not in a depressing way, but strategically. They understood that every dollar they didn't spend on lifestyle inflation was a dollar working for them in investments. Here's what's really important to understand. You're not trying to hit 100,000 by 30 so that you can feel accomplished. You're trying to build momentum. Every dollar you invest now is worth $10 or more by the time you're 40 because of compound growth. The people who are going to be comfortable by 40 or 50 aren't necessarily the ones who had the highest income in their 20s. They're the ones who figured out early how to live below their means and who invested that gap consistently over time. That's the real secret that nobody talks about. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you're 30 and you don't have 100,000 in net worth, you're not a failure, you're statistically normal. You're in the 72%, and that's actually okay. But if you want to build real wealth, real security, real options in your life, you need to change your approach. You need to stop trying to hit an arbitrary milestone number. You need to start optimizing for the math that actually works in your life. You need to reduce your fixed expenses. You need to increase your income in meaningful ways. You need to invest consistently. You need to think long term. And you need to understand that this is a marathon, not a sprint. The $100,000 by 30 is a nice story. It sounds impressive at a party. But the real wealth is built by the people who understand that the numbers are just a system. And if you want different results, you need to understand the system well enough to work within it. Strategically. That's the real skill. That's what actually matters. If this video helped you see your finances and your situation differently, smash that like button and subscribe for more content that actually challenges how you think about money and wealth and what it takes to build it in the real world. I'll see you in the next one.